Hi, Judah. First question is, do the reoffenders tend to not reoffend because having a goal and outlet is primarily improving their mental well-being?
So yes and no. Yes, in a minor way, that's definitely helpful. In a bigger way, this is a big debate, which is what actually cures reoffending. There's a big group of people that say employment does. If you have a job when you come out of prison, that reduces reoffending. There's another group of people that say housing does. And actually, the qualitative data doesn't really give us a huge amount to go on. What we believe in and how we operate is I'm consistently absolutely sure that relationships and the ability to do relationship better is what ultimately prevents people from going back to old pathways. So the social capital that maybe was missing in certain pockets of the lives of people that grow up in challenging circumstances, how we communicate, how we take responsibility, how we deal with change, so things that weren't necessarily part of the family unit or school, those skills help us to become better employees, better employers, better tenants, better fathers, better husbands. They also allow us to break into different networks. And I think it's networks and our ability to move from quite toxic networks to new networks of people, and the way that we do that through better relationship skills that allow us to spiral and see social mobility.
Yes, community is key. Question number 2. What were the key challenges of the internal prison bureaucracy?
I want to be really clear on this point. My experience of working within the prison system is, on the whole, working with people who are super golden-hearted and want to see the same goals and objectives. And it's very easy for initiatives to come back and say, actually, the prison system or the people in the prison system are somehow everything's broken. Yes, the system makes it difficult, but then, and there's a question further on in the list that we talk about systems mapping. Whenever we build anything around certainty in an uncertain world, there are always going to be absolutely moments where these things break down, because our world is actually uncertain, and the moment we try and put a structure around it that feels concrete, the second you do that, there are flaws that happen. The difficulties, so to answer the question, the difficulties that we face are much more nuanced challenges. So our sessions might get stopped on a particular day because there aren't enough officers to be able to run the sessions because there's been an incident on somewhere else on the prison, which means that impacts our consistency of delivery. It might be that we're working with a cohort, but 2 of them, we find out halfway through a 2-month, 3-month narrative that they get shipped to a different prison that morning that we don't know anything about. So we're constantly having to work around things that impact us. So the real skill then is not to bemoan it, but to say, cool, how do we create something for failure? How do we develop an initiative that is flexible and adaptable and knows that things are going to be broken, because there's no such thing as a certain system? And so how do we create something that has that flexibility and adaptability around it? So those challenges that I mentioned, to be honest, the more I talk about them, the more kind of small and insignificant they seem. They're really opportunities for us to do what we do better and become more agile in how we respond.
Yes, and work around them, I guess, would really, really help. Question number 3. What was the second book you mentioned during the session? Was it Design London? So
there was this book, which is No Logo by Naomi Klein. And then there's this book, The Design London Story.
Lovely.
And it's Royal College of Art, Imperial College London, I think is the 2011 Yeah, so they would know how to get hold of copies or if they need to reprint copies. But this was, this was the second book.
Are there online versions of both books?
I mean, no logo. There's online versions. There's a version in pretty much every language that exists. It's just a seminal book. There's a 10-year, and so I think this year is the 20-year anniversary of this book. But there was a 10-year anniversary where the author reflected on 10 years post, and how a lot of those thoughts had been picked up and strands had been picked up. So I think The Guardian just did an interview with Naomi Klein to talk about 20 years on. But there's definitely loads of versions of this. This, I think, would need a bit of digging with Royal College of Art to see maybe someone at Service Design might be able to point us in the right direction where we can get hold of some of these books.
Great. I'm sure the audience will be very, very interested. Question number 4. Hi, Judah. Thank you for sharing the story of InHouse Records. You mentioned that you also wanted to see change in yourself when you started it. Could you share a little bit more about your personal journey and how InHouse impacted you? I know that you covered this, but a few more words would be great.
Yeah, of course. So although I grew up in this country and I'm a British citizen, I wasn't born in this country. I was born in the Middle East, in actually a country that isn't necessarily welcomed that much, certainly not politically. So I experienced being an outsider growing up for the first 10, 15 years of my life in a very different London in the 70s and 80s. And so my experience of being an outsider led me to predominantly some unhealthy coping mechanisms of how I could become an insider again. I would create pathways of reintegrating back into society, and some of those pathways were unhealthy, and they proved to be difficult for me to shake off in later life. And it got to a point in my life where I just didn't like the kind of person I'd become. So I was able to retrace a lot of my behavior and realize that actually the motivation for it was positive. The application of it was negative. But you then begin to realize, well, hang on a minute, if the motivation was positive, surely there must be a positive way of being able to reintegrate. The more I was learning about that for myself, the more I realized that the language I was speaking happened to be the same that I was hearing from groups of people that I was working with at the time in homelessness. And so then this understanding of actually the change that I want is in some way similar to the change that I want to be able to provide the access to for a group of people that want it as much. And so you kind of find your tribe, which is really people that want to change.
Exactly, I agree. Question number 5. How do you fund all this great work?
So what probably didn't come across on the talk is that InHouse started with 2 years of self-funded research, 2 years of really just knocking on prison doors, on probation doors, saying, I want to learn a bit about what's going on in here. I don't really know what's going to come of it. We might not have anything. We might have a paper. We might have an initiative. Can you grant me access to speak to some of you guys? And most of the time it was very suspicious. Some of the time it was, yes, but what are you going to offer in return? And very, very, very few times it was like, yeah, with no strings. So for a chunk of the time, I offered music lessons, English lessons for free in order to be able to get access to work with the guys, to be able to understand, to ask questions, to get an understanding of what was going on. So that was 2 years of self-funding. This is really important because in social innovation, my limited experience is you have to sacrifice something if you want to see change with people who have nothing, because they're giving trust and hope. so what is it that I want to give? And if I want to start by wanting to get it funded by someone to get behind my ideas, then I'm already starting from a place where I'm not actually giving up anything. And I think that was really important for me. I'm not saying this is what everybody else has to do, but for me, it was really important that it started on an equal footing, that I needed to give up something. Somebody else was going to give up their time and their trust and their hope.
Yes, for a bigger cause as well. So it makes it all worth it, and insisting, I guess, in supporting this initiative from the very beginning.
Absolutely. After that, the funding was a lot easier because we could be really specific about what it was. And so when you're able to either show someone a plan or show someone metrics for what you've done, then people are willing to get behind a project or an initiative if it's saving money. If reoffending costs 15 billion a year, which it does, at 64%, then any initiative that is looking to try and reduce that and can either demonstrate a really good plan as to why we think we can do that, or better still, some tiny prototype metrics, then funding becomes a bit easier. Not always a breeze, but just a bit easier. But initially, it was 2 years of just doing it on my own.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Regarding through the gate service, I think we mentioned in the in-session talk, one of our attendees was keen to hear any stories of how inmates have flourished creatively since being released. Also the ongoing mentorship, how is this monitored and managed to prevent reoffending?
So what we do on the inside is what we continue to do on the outside. We have a platform called Continuum, which means consistently evolving, consistently learning. That platform is the same inside a jail on the outside of jail, and that has a matrix, a thin sliced competency matrix that we've co-created with RCA and Ernst & Young. And that allows us to be able to work with the guys to be able to understand where they're at in their communication skills, accountability skills, adaptability skills. That is a journey that continues post-release when our guys become graduates, because they're graduating in-house, and they find themselves somewhere on that journey. At one end is being a member of a graduate council, which is where our graduates who succeed in doing a relationship well sit. And at the other end of the spectrum is being an affiliate of in-house, someone that's just started. And that journey from affiliate to graduate council is a journey that can take place in prison or out of prison, but usually across the both.
Yeah.
So there's a metric of how we measure that, and that's done with dialogic skills. I mentioned communication, adaptability, accountability, and technical skills. And it's bound by the pursuit of the aspiration of music. So we still continue to record, we still continue to write, we still continue to perform. That all are the milestones, are the beats, the engagement beats, and the work we do are around those beats.
Yeah, and consistency must help them, especially when they're out.
Sometimes,
following this kind of program. Question number 7, do you plan to expand your platform outside the UK in the future?
Yeah, I think we touched on this in the talk. There's definitely, I've been working with the Rhode Island School of Design and a correctional facility in Connecticut to explore the possibility of some research there. And right now I'm exploring what that could look like, because going back to my earlier thing about sacrifice, what does that mean? And how am I going to be able to do a year or 2 years of research to fund it myself? So that's in that stage, but there's very keen interest from the States to do it because there's a potential ease of transfer in terms of language and some of the nuanced culture, although equally there's a lot of cultural differences there. But yes, is a short answer to that question. Yes, we're exploring America.
That's great. Next question, how do you define a creative? Are these skills everyone has? And if so, how do we unlock them?
I think if we go one step further back, my practice has been based on a few different elements, but core to it is that we are interdependent as humans, that we are unique and that we have unique skills and attributes, but we also are reliant on each other. And for a chunk of time, possibly 150 odd years, maybe a bit more, post-industrial revolution, we've been ushered into living independent lives. And independence is the goal, to have our own, to accumulate, to have more of, and to be purpose-driven in independence. And, you know, there's a lot of positives around that. We need autonomy. We need our own agency. We need to be our own advocates. All of that is really good. But what's unhealthy is when we live separately, but when we're actually still connected, that becomes some real difficult scenarios. So understanding our interdependence, understanding that we're connected, is the first element in understanding actually, once connected, we can see that there are skills that have been, not that we need to learn, but have just been covered up by years and years and years of living quite separately. And one of those is absolutely our creativity. Make no mistake, creativity heals. This is fundamental in how I progress in the work I do. I see any creative act, from guys sitting down just trying to think of their life story in a poem or in a set of lyrics, to painting, to writing, to acting, to anything, designing. So this understanding of creativity as a type goes back to understanding our interdependence, and then understanding that within our interdependence there are skills that we just haven't used for a long time, that are inherent to us, that maybe we've forgotten, that maybe a different kind of way of living has kind of like covered it up for us. And when we engage with those kind of skills, which is what we draw out of the work that we do with InHouse, creativity becomes natural, like breathing. It's just something normal that we do. So I believe it's inherent with everyone. And I believe that as we uncover interdependency, we see that through the people that we work with, 100%.
Yeah. Another question is, did you get inspired by El Sistema from Venezuela's Jose Antonio Abreu? It was a program for children in Caracas, Barrios, one of our attendees asked.
I haven't heard of that initiative, but I will check it out now.
Great. And question number 10, could you also tell us how you identified the issue that needed tackling? I think that social innovation can sometimes take time to translate to results. What were your parameters to measure results? I think we covered it a little bit earlier, but
yeah, we definitely covered it a little bit around the measuring, but around the time, so foolishly or not foolishly, I decided to work in decades. I think 10 years is a good amount of time to understand the impact or lack of impact of work that's been achieved, but also to understand the neighborhood, the ecosystem of the environment you're part of. So, oh my goodness, 16 years ago, I decided that I was going to spend the next 30 years of my life working a decade in homelessness, a decade in the criminal justice system, and a decade with young families in challenging circumstances. Now, I don't know if I'll finish that, but I've done 10 years in homelessness, and I'm halfway through doing a decade in the criminal justice system. And it's only because I set those parameters that I'm able to say, after 10 years of homelessness, I got so much wrong, and it was so much abject failure. And I wouldn't have been able to take that failure and leverage that against something positive in the criminal justice system if I hadn't given myself a long time to work in that arena. So I think time is really important. I think around social innovation, the idea that we can parachute in with some great ideas and then quickly get out might have some short-term goals, but actually if we want to see systemic change, we need to stick around.
Yeah, I think it's very noble to commit to something that big. It's very impressive. Do you also do some analog unplugged sessions? This could help work around the technology challenges and still engage people in musical creation and expression.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when we first started, the security department of the prison were very skeptical, and rightly so, of us wanting to bring in anything technology based. So literally we had a guitar. And it took us quite a long time to get a handheld recorder. That's all we had.
Wow.
And we still were able to progress and develop and make some, our initial impact on those sessions with a guitar and a handheld recorder and pen and paper were what ultimately tipped us into going into other prisons. Basically the work that we did on that super analog, super old school tech of acoustic guitar, handheld recorder, pen and paper was what gave us that initial prototype, which what gave us the impact to say, hang on a minute, I think there's something really important here. Now we can even argue to say some of the tech we have, whilst it's good, it maybe doesn't get us to the same places we want to, So we have laptops, we have Macs, we're able to explore production techniques. But there's a value in actually not having that stuff or not having that until a later point. There's a value in having very limited resources because, we get more innovative and creative when there's squeeze around us.
Exactly. It unlocks the creativity. And has the change to the people, candidates joining this program, been noticed and or appreciated by every part included? For example, do the officers in the prison see this as a positive change that they're also willing to promote?
Yeah, I would say by and large that's true. Sometimes it isn't, but if it isn't true, then that's on me for not being a good storyteller. The majority of the time it does work, and other stakeholders do see that, which is why the work we do is so well supported in most of the prisons. In fact, officers will join in. Officers that can play an instrument will inherently pick up a guitar or pick up a bass or sit at the keyboard and write a song with some of the learners in prison. The heads of reducing reoffending, the governors will pop in and that will engage with it and they can see its value. The situations where value isn't seen is our failure in being able to tell that story to different stakeholders within that environment. And our failure to understand the time pressures that they have and the amount of time that we expect them to take out of their day to see if one of the many education providers that are in the prison is doing a good job or not. So I would say the majority of the time it is happening, but if it isn't happening, then it's on us to make sure that that message is told in a way that people can genuinely hear it in a very easy to digest way. It's not the responsibility for the officer to go out of their way to know this. It's for us to be able to present it to them in a way they can understand.
Yeah, that makes sense. How would you differentiate service design from systems design and systems design mapping? I don't know if it's not too relevant, but
it's not that it's not relevant. I'm sure it is relevant. I'm just not the right person to ask. I've never really felt I've always felt I was on the fringes. I've never really felt I was accepted in the design world. I've never really felt I've been accepted in social entrepreneur. I've felt like I've just slipped in the middle because Within design, I've always relied heavily on my skills of being an outsider, which are not really design taught skills. They are skills that you develop inherently as a child, right? Within the social entrepreneurial world, I bring design into that, which makes them quite skeptical. So all of that to say is I'm probably not the right person to answer that question. Although, ask the majority of the service design students, either the first or second years at the RCA, who are just brilliant students, they'll probably give a really quality answer for that.
Thank you. One of the questions probably from a student at the RCA, where can I find a link to Alessandros' article that was mentioned in the session?
Yeah, so Alessandro is going to post that on Medium. I think I just spoke to him yesterday. He's going to post it on Medium, and he will put it out there for people to read.
Great. And is there a structure to this program that encourages the people in prison to make change for the rest of their life? I'm assuming there must be a focus on changing habits and not just having a distraction.
Yeah, 100%. So going back to the previous thing, the structure or the platform is called Continuum, and it's about how we shift to become lifelong learners. And so within that, there's always a desire to want to be a better version, learn better ways of communicating, learn better ways of listening, learn better ways of dealing with change, learn better ways of being more accountable for our actions and becoming more responsible. These are really important because if we go back to, I think, the first question, when we live in an uncertain world, we can't necessarily rely on certain structures alone or certainty in our structures alone. We have to build in a desire of flexibility, which is why interdependence is so important to living, because our reliance on a few people and our desire to want to change. And we can take the examples in nature that we see. Everything
is interconnected.
Everything is connected, and everything is always changing.
Yeah,
everything is always changing, and so the answer isn't to just create certainty and certain structures within a changing environment. That's partly helpful for sure. We need certain structure, but also we need to learn to be adaptable and to move with that change. So that's a mindset. And it's the mindset that is at the DNA of everything that we do at InHouse. We are an elaborate Trojan horse. We look like we're a functioning record label, and we've gone to the trouble of actually being a functioning record label connected with Universal Distribution and Sony Publishing.
Wow.
But really, we're about developing dialogic skills through music.
That's very, very important. Do you work with young offender institutions?
Yeah, one in London.
Great. And another question is, have you linked up with Youth Cable Television, the charity set up by Sabrina Guinness and Greg Dyke?
No, I would like to.
Great. Is the book you created during lockdown available for the public to buy?
It's not. So we created a magazine, and it's a weekly magazine, and it's really just for the prison population. So there's a very, there are lots of, going back to those, bureaucracies, there's lots of rules that would prevent us from providing something for public consumption that was created internally for the prison. But we are, and the magazine isn't, we're not charging those prisons. That's just what we're giving to them on a weekly basis. But we are going to explore creating maybe once every 6 months or once a year, something that is public facing, that captures the stories of our graduates, of our learners in prison, of some of our staff, some prison officers, Everybody that we've engaged with as part of our sort of primary stakeholders within the problem space. So we're gonna explore creating something like that if we think that the demand is there for people to read.
I'm sure there will be people that would love to read and listen to those stories. And I think we covered that during the session, but you mentioned this scheme makes people better employees, fathers, husbands. Does this mean InHouse only works with male offenders? Will the same opportunities be available to females as well?
Yeah, we talked about it briefly. We want to work in the female estate. It's a smaller population than the male estate considerably. I think it's less than 10% of the 86,000 in the UK is female estate. I've done the research. I've worked with a couple of female prisons to look at a different kind of an offering, the same platform, so the same dialogic skills, but a different kind of offering, still around music. So we're ready to go. We're just waiting for a female estate to ask us in.
Yeah. To what extent is a research, social and emotional development approach or theory integral to the way that you work in prisons?
Yeah, I think we are. This one was asked.
We answered, yeah, but
yeah, it's absolutely integral. Absolutely. Without that, we won't know where someone is at. We won't know where their starting point is, and if we don't know where the starting point is, how can we know what development or growth can look like, or what our role is within that process? So yeah, it's super important.
And another question is, could you please give us an example of a difficult ethical decision to take and how you dealt with it? For example, have you been offered or found funding that turned out to be of an unethical source, yet felt that this funding could help create and develop positive change and creativity?
No, I haven't been in that scenario. But in lockdown, we took a decision that beyond delivering on our promises to our learners and the prisons and our graduates, beyond doing that, I felt it was the right thing to do to try and create a response to people in general prison population, because they are going to be, from the 23rd of March, locked up for 23 and a half hours a day with very little literature to keep them going. So the magazine we created, it was a reverse ethical decision. There wasn't a client for that magazine. There isn't a client for that magazine. But we've distributed over 30,000 issues. We do that every week. It's the right thing to do. It's not the right financial thing to do, but it's the right thing to do. And at the end of this madness lockdown period, we want to be able to look in the mirror to say, did we do everything we can to support people who were in the most challenging circumstances? Did we do all that was possible to us and explore all the resources that we had in order to be able to make a difference? So I'm sure that that's the right thing. And since doing that, we've seen the guys respond to it really well, in real positive engagement, in wanting to learn how to play an instrument. Fender guitars are amazing because they donated 100 guitars to us that we've distributed across the jails. And so guys have used this lockdown period through reading the magazine to learn an instrument, to become more creative, to express what they can't use words to express, to be able to express it in song, in feeling, in music. And what could have been a really toxic situation for 3,000 guys regularly every week is a more positive one.
Yes, it is indeed very positive. Have you encountered the resistant argument from those who see prison more from the perspective of punishment than rehabilitation? that offering positive programs such as yours might even encourage offenders?
I mean, look, this is the biggest debate, right? Mm-hmm. The biggest debate that's going on for 500-600 years. Is the right response to crime, a criminal activity, is it punishment or is it rehabilitation? And these two factions will both use similar data. So people will say, actually, punishment reduces reoffending, and other people will say non-custodial sentences will reduce reoffending. And there's no definitive winner, partly because actually, or maybe, I was about to say partly because I don't think really the qualitative research has taken place. But that would not be fair, because there has been a lot of research that's been done. But the debate is unclear, because no side really seems to have a clear demonstrative set of data, which is why I think that we're asking the wrong question, whether it's punishment or whether it's rehabilitation. I think relationship here is fundamental, and we need to understand the past, and we need to understand the context for every single individual that comes into this. Now, that sounds incredibly complex, and it sounds incredibly time consuming, and quite frankly, we'd rather like a very simple system that can just say 10 years, boom, and you're going to come out reformed. But I feel that there's definitely some kind of blend between custodial and non-custodial sentences, but it has to have an understanding of the past context in order to be able to move forward properly. But I think getting drawn into that debate of is punishment or non-custodial, I think that's just the wrong questions to be asking, because they'll keep asking the same questions. They'll keep having non-conclusive data to be able to make those arguments, and we'll just go on for another 600 years like we have been.
Exactly. We're moving the point.
Well, exactly. I also think, another addition to that is, if we want to see different outcomes, we need to get different people around the table.
Yeah. And last question, do you have any plans to expand in-house to include other forms of art that would also be inclusive, for example, filmmaking or pop-up galleries?
No, but there are plans to take the learning, the theory of change, the practice, the model processes of in-house, and instead of creating other little initiatives, to take that up and then say, this is open source, you can create whatever you want from all of this.
Great. Thank you very much, Judah, and thank you for being so generous with your thoughts and sharing this with our audience.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. I loved it. I loved the talk and this, and very, very appreciative. So thank you.
Thank you.